welcome to our project. My name is Shannon.
I'm Samantha.
I'm Sarah.
And I'm Nanette.
And we're gonna go fast. Alright, so number one, so our whole thing is about completing business messages, so kind of what they just did times two. So the first one is revising your message and evaluating the first draft. The way that you go about evaluating, the amount of focus that you put into it, that all depends on your message, how it's getting sent out, who it's going to, all that good fun stuff. Obviously, if you're sending an IM between friends, you're gonna read that real quick. If you're presenting a project to a classroom, you're gonna read that a few times, send it to some other people, make sure it's good to go. So the second one is leave time for fresh eyes. That just means distance yourself from your project. If you edit as soon as you're finished writing, you're less likely to catch those small errors than you were if you were to leave some space and then come back to it. Additionally, make sure the document does its job. Obviously, we are all graded on assignments on a weekly, sometimes daily basis. So we know that the purpose of your writing needs to be there. You need to know why you're writing, and then your writing needs to do that job. And then finally, focus on the beginning and the end. The beginning and the end are what people remember the most. The beginning and the end are what people remember the most. Remember that. So focus on those, make sure they're strong, make sure you capture your audience, and make sure you give them a strong close. Second is revising the work of others. We do this, again, all the time, peer editing, so I'm gonna go this pretty quickly. Don't impose your personal agenda. Again, it's the whole purpose is to enhance the work of others, not to make them like a little copy of you. So like they talked about a little earlier, use positive words, but again, it's not about creating a second version of your work, it's enhancing that other work. Understand the writer's intent. Again, you have to know the purpose of the project, the paper, the message. While you're editing, have that purpose in mind. And then finally, ask yourself relevant questions. The questions you should ask yourself is the information that's in the project. Is it enough to satisfy the audience? Is it accurate information? Is it relevant information? And is it a good mix of information? And what I mean by that is it too much data to overwhelm them, or is it too much generic stuff that they're not actually getting the full message? So just make sure it has a good balance.
Alrighty guys, so learning objective 2 is technique for improving readability, and so there's 4 techniques to do that. So what do you think of when you hear the word readability? It's exactly what it sounds. It's how the reading appears to the reader. So the first technique is varying your sentence length. So you can have short sentences that are 8 words or less to 15, medium sentences that are 6 to 25, and I want to emphasize that medium sentence length because that's important. And then also long sentences that are roughly 25 words or 26 words or more. So the thing is, you can have short, medium, long sentences, but don't have a bunch of short ones in a row, because then it's choppy. Or if you have too lengthy sentences, it kind of just drags on, and like you kind of lose the reader. So you can stay between that 8 to 26, but really try and do no more and no less. And when you use them, make sure you're varying them as well. So the second technique is keeping your paragraphs short. So keep it 100 words or fewer. That's usually 3 to 6 sentences. The average is 84 words. You use your paragraphs by thought. So when you're moving on to a new transition or you're stating something else, basically when you have a new thought in the paragraph or the message, that's when you move on to the next paragraph. And the last one is, I don't do this, but it's in the textbook. Wait, no, go back. So only using a 1-sentence paragraph for emphasis. I don't use 1-sentence paragraphs, but if you really need to emphasize something, just put 1 sentence and go to the next paragraph. You can do that, but only for emphasis. And so the third technique is using lists to clarify and emphasize. So these 2 things are saying the exact same thing, but when I look at narrative, I don't even want to read it. Like, I don't even want to start. It's very jumbly. It's just a long paragraph. It's a big message. But when you see list 1, 2, 3, like owning your own business, that's what, like, you know right there. Like, it's very clear. So that's why using lists are really good for clarifying and emphasizing. So using what is good for clarifying and emphasizing?
Lists.
Yes. Okay. And so the last technique to technique number 4 is using headings and subheadings. I hope you guys like puns. So the way you can achieve that is through organization, attention, and connection. So organization is really the at-a-glance look. It gives you that like organization that you want to organize your message. The attention is like the heading or subheading will grab your attention. That's the first thing you read. You kind of decide from there if you want to keep going or not. So that's why it's important to have a good like attention-grabbing heading or subheading. And then connection. So obviously it's the first thing you read, and everything flows in after that. So you have your heading, subheading, and then the introductory paragraph almost explains the heading and subheading. So there are 2 types of headings. If you guys did your flashcards, descriptive headings and informative headings. So descriptive headings is just saying what it is, cost considerations. Informative headings is more like you're guiding the reader what to think, so redesigning material flow. So, when the reader reads the heading, they think, okay, I'm gonna be thinking about like redesign in this paragraph. So that's kind of what informative headings entail.
And the next objective number 3 would be editing for clarity and conciseness. So when you're editing for clarity and conciseness, you want to make sure that your message is clear and concise as possible. And you want to make sure that the reader can extract any meanings without reading it more than twice. And you also would want to look closely at your paragraph's organization, the sentences, and your word choices. And so there are 8 steps for you can take to improve the clarity of your writing. Number 1, you can break up overly long sentences. Overly long sentences, that means taking compound sentences too far. You can combine them and construct them into one sentence. The second one is you can rewrite hedging. That means pulling back statements about a topic. For instance, sometimes you may want to write may or seems to avoid a judgment statement or predication as stating a fact, and that's like overqualifying sentences. And then number 3, impose parallelism, and that's when you're using 2 dissimilar constructions for similar ideas. And parallelism shows that the ideas are related or of some similar instances or of the same level. And then number 4, correct dangling modifiers. You want to be careful not to leave this type of modifier dangling with no connection to the subject of the sentence. And number 5, reword long sentences, long noun sentences. That's stringing too many nouns together. And number 6, replace camouflage verbs. And that's when you're changing verbs into nouns. So you need to watch for the words that end with ing, ion, tion, ment, and ent. These kinds of endings, they can change the verbs into nouns, so you have to be careful of that. And then number 7 is clarifying sentences structures. So this is when you have to keep the subject close to the subject and the predicate of a sentence close together as possible. And number 8, clarifying awkward references. You have to, if you want the reader to refer to a specific point in a document, you want to avoid vague references. And then there are 4 tips on making your writing more concise. That's when you need to delete unnecessary words or phrases. This is when you test whether a word or phrase is essential. Try the sentence without it, and if the meaning doesn't change, you just leave it out. And number 2, you want to shorten long words and phrases. This is when they are generally more vivid and easier to read than long ones, and also by using infinitives in place of phrases, then you often shorten sentences while making them clear.
Alright, so I'm going to be talking to you guys about the 4 principles of effective design when it comes to producing your message. So the first point that you need to focus on is to be consistent. If you are not consistent, then it's going to be very hard for your audience to recognize your documents and know what you're talking about. It's very important to have a sense of balance, and especially visual balance, because you don't want to have a lot of information in front of your reader. Otherwise it'll just kind of blur together and they won't know what you're talking about and won't know where to focus. Then it's very important to have restraint. As I said, kind of goes hand in hand with balance, because in order to have balance, you have to show restraint. And this typically refers to using simpler and fewer as your guiding concepts or guiding words. So you want to make sure that you have as less on the page as you possibly can. Make sure that you have a lot of detail though, or an attention to detail, because it affects design and makes it and it can be difficult to read. If say you have a very large paragraph, you should probably separate it into 2 columns so that it's easier for your audience to read. So margins and justification when it comes to readability. So it's very important to make sure that you know what your margins are. There are 4 different types, and they're the space around the text and in between the text. And there are 4 different types. However, you don't need to necessarily know them because they are all on Microsoft Word, and you can kind of just click through and see which one looks best for your message. So if you want a professional one, you would go for more of a professional looking margin. With typefaces, they are the physical designs of letters, numbers, and other characters. So it's pretty much just how it looks on the page. And then type styles are the modifications that lend contrast to your writing. So you'll have a normal page, and then if you want to emphasize something, you'll put it in bold. If you want to cite a book or a movie or something, or a quote, you would put it in italics, and the same goes for highlighting something. It's very important to avoid styles that slow the audience's progress. For example, do not underline too much, and do not put all caps, because it actually interferes with the audience's ability to recognize words, which is very interesting. I mean, I see words swimming together a lot when it comes to this kind of thing, so just make sure to focus on that. Continue. So this is my favorite slide, and my group will agree with me on this, but I get way too excited about it. But this is white space, and I love white space because it's literally just this. Make sure you have a lot of this in your writing. So for example, white space, I'll go into the definition, is anything without text or artwork. So this slide, it's great.
Use it.
Yeah, make sure to use it a lot, because if you don't, because it helps to break up paragraphs, and please do not have no spacing in between paragraphs. It looks really jumbled, and you don't know it. Your reader will not know where to start, or will lose their place very easily. So it's very important to have a lot of white space. It makes everything look cleaner and much nicer with overall design as well. Sad that I'm past that slide now. But as chapter 5 kind of discussed a bit, it's very important to know how to design messages for mobile phones as well. So you have to think in small chunks. Make sure that small paragraphs are very important. Maybe 2 to 3 sentences or a good idea. I'm basing off when I read books on my phone. It's very important for that. Make generous use of white space. I cannot even say this enough. White space is so important. Format simply. Make sure that the format's very easy to read, and the most important thing that I will touch on the slide is consider horizontal and vertical layouts. You need to make sure, because phones and iPads, they are able to be vertical and horizontal, so it's very important to have a nice looking layout for both. Otherwise it just kind of looks like a jumbled mess when you turn it to the side, and it doesn't look right. So make sure that you consider those when you are designing your layout.
All right, so I'm going to talk about proofreading. Is it the same thing as editing? Not really. Is there a difference? Maybe. So, number 5, proofread your message. The first one is make multiple passes. We're all very familiar with that. Read it 2, 3, 4, 5, 12, however you choose. Read it multiple times. Use perceptual tricks. Now that's something I learned about in this chapter, which is a new trick that I will use, because I'm a victim of no matter how many times I read it, there's still an error. So the perceptual tricks that it includes, or that it talks about, is like starting from the bottom. So reading the last word on the page and then going backwards up to the first word. That way you're not reading it in the context of sentences, you're just treating it on a word by word basis. Another similar is to, but you can start at the top this time, is kind of go back to your kindergarten days when you were first learning how to read and you put your finger under each word and you were like, the cat ran. Kind of like that, but you know, in your complex college papers. Double check high priority items. Those are things like names of associates, dates for deadlines, numbers, especially if you're negotiating a salary. You don't want to say I'd like $5,000 when you really said I want $50,000. Double check those before you send them out. Give yourself some distance. Goes back to what I talked about in the beginning, that whole fresh eye approach. Do it again. Be vigilant. That just means try not to do it when you're tired and use tactics to ease the stress on your mind. So break it up into chunks, do it over a span of time. That way you don't get, tired. Stay focused, concentrate. Review electronic documents on paper. That is something kind of twofold. So sometimes when you're producing a document like on Word, but you're eventually going to print it out and pass it out, you want to make sure that when it prints out it formats correctly and that your audience will be able to understand the flow that you were intending. So print it out that way so you can test it out. But also, we're all staring at screens, computers, everything like that all day. There's this whole like blue light thing. Blue light makes your eyes tired. So print it out and don't stare at blue light. And then take your time. I mean, that's kind of self-explanatory. The quicker you go, the less careful you are. And proofreading is your last chance to make finishing touches before you send out your message. So you definitely want to be very careful and take your time and not rush through it.
And now that your message has been proofread, you want to finish the product with the distribution method. You need to make sure that when you distribute it, you want to do it carefully so that everyone who needs it will be able to receive it. And then there's 4 factors that you want to consider. One is the cost, and the cost is when you have like printing documents that you would have to pay for or have to deliver reports or anything like that, because it can be expensive and it can add up. So you want to weigh the cost versus the benefits of it, and then the convenience of it, and that's how much work is involved that you are that you put into it for your audience. And then the time is how soon does the message need to reach your audience, and so you don't want to waste a lot of time sending packages overnight or delivering it when the actual reader is not going to pick it up and read it for another week or so. So you don't need to necessarily mark the package as urgent when it really isn't urgent. And then you want to also watch the security and the privacy of that, because most companies, they're gonna restrict you from sending the email or the message if it's not secure. So that's it.
All right, guys, to wrap up the most boring chapter in the textbook, hopefully we made it a little bit interesting for you. But learning objective 1.
So the first one was carefully revise your message. Again, this is your first step in the editing process. Read it over and kick out those obvious errors.
2 is make sure to remember the 4 techniques to improve the overall readability. So that's varying sentence length, making paragraphs, using those 1-sentence emphasis paragraphs if need be, and using lists to clarify and emphasize.
Okay, and you want to make sure that you edit for conciseness and clarity.
Okay, number 4 is to have an effective design. and make sure that it looks very professional before you send it out and in the message. Make sure to have a lot of white space. I cannot reiterate this enough.
White space.
White space is so important. Anyway, continue.
All right, number 5 was proofread your message. Again, this is the last time you get to read over the message before you distribute it out. So you want to make sure you do it carefully and with your full attention.
And you want to use the distribution method by distributing your message properly.
All right, before we all pull out our phones, does anyone have any questions? Let's
Does
do a
anyone need
Kahoot.
clarity? All right, Kahoot it up, my guys.
Alrighty.
Take your phones out. Get ready for spookiness.
Oh, this is not good. Oh, there we go.
Oh, there we go.
Perfect. Start. It goes on. Yeah.
Wow.
We have a 17.
Keep in mind, if you win, you get prizes.
You're gonna have one less, because I think I left my phone up there. Yeah, I was just gonna say that. We're on an hour, by the way.
I was wondering what that was.
I saw that and I was like, before we start, dude.
Who's bored? Raise your hand. I am here to entertain you, and you tell me you're bored.
That's so sad.
Is that supposed to be a Saints reference, or like you just don't know?
Are we having only 3 people? What? That's so
Oh, one person left.
Yeah, 3 people.
Okay, I like it.
Come on, guys. What the hell do you think?
Yeah. Yes, is that a question? Yeah, we said we're respecting your time.
Oh,
If
okay.
you need to leave, you're
Okay,
able
yeah,
to,
I have
but
to go,
we
that's
are still
why.
in a 30-minute time span. We're gonna try and keep that.
You don't get candy or prizes. Goodbye.
Yeah, if you don't stay, you don't get prizes. There's a lot of prizes. We'll sit down.
7? Is anyone else trying to log in? Otherwise, we'll just move on. No? No one else?
9. 10.
Are we ready? Is there anyone else who wants to play?
Everyone good?
Alright,
Let's do
moving
it.
on.
That's not me.
Everyone good?
Okay, we going.
We are starting now. Are you ready? True or false? Focus your attention on the body of your message because that is what people remember the most.
I said it twice, y'all. Woo, go team.
It's false. What is it, Sarah?
The beginning and the
Beginning
end.
and the end.
Yeah, I said it twice. Who that? Good job.
I don't know who that is.
I don't-
Witch.
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 Love
Halloween.
Y'all, we had fun. If you didn't, it's fine.
Oh my goodness.
Wait, do yours stuck in my ear?
Yeah, there's this
Woo!
one.
Come on, guys. How many questions are
Maybe
not
that
correct?
person's favorite color was green. It's fine.
All right. How many words make up a medium-length sentence?
Ooh.
Twice.
Ooh.
Said it twice. Maybe 3 times. That's awesome.
Yay, good job, guys.
Great job, everyone.
Ooh.
Ooh.
Ovary.
Who that's still in the lead. You can use blank to clarify and emphasize.
Oh, I remember this one.
Oh, do you?
Yay, Liz.
Go
Instead of
team.
narrative paragraphs.
You guys are doing so great.
Alright, how many steps to improve the clarity of your writing?
I remember this one too.
It's obviously 31.
Yeah.
Eight.
Happy Halloween. Bye, friends. Have a great day.
Bye! Is that everyone? Do we lose 2 people?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. Well,
Woo! Yay!
oh, that did not change the scoreboard at all.
Wow, great job, everyone.
If you
We're halfway there.
We're not reading it out loud.
Ah, it's fine.
Okay.
I don't know.
That's very sad.
Everyone who stayed gets candy.
Ooh, 3.
Woo! Go
Moving
you.
on up.
She's like, I want Starbucks. I'm not even
Tell
telling
one
you.
of the 4 tips to make your writing concise. I honestly don't. is very true.
Dang.
Alright, guys, we
Yay! The
have
scoreboard got changed up again.
One more
I mean,
question.
That's so bad for the people
Oh, is this
that
for the
are
winner,
in the
or-
lead.
What? Oh, no, that's typeface, everyone. That's what is typeface? Read on their phone.
Read them, they're hilarious.
Woo! Great job, team.
Yay!
White space is distracting.
From the text.
Yes! Quickest one ever.
So
Great job, guys.
I'm so proud. Means I did my job right.
Perceptual trick. I talked about that.
I got this really good story.
Ooh.
Breathe.
Behind your breathe.
It is
Only
important
two
to
more,
double check
kids.
names and numbers.
Great job, everyone.
Oh.
That's got changed up again.
Wow, 1 point.
On the last
Feels
Last
better.
question, everyone. What is the no?
This was the last slide.
The tricky one.
Oh.
This is question. Oh, wait.
Hey.
Alright,
Let's see how badly the scoreboard got this time.
Okay.
You win every time.
Elisa, you get candy because you came in third. Pick your candy.
And everyone else gets candy because we just have a ton of candy.
Who was
so come
second?
here.
Oh, wow.
We also have Pop-Tarts if you guys like
We have
Pop-Tarts.
Pop-Tarts and zebra cakes.
Damn.